Hello, my name's Susan White. I'm the author of the novel Cut, and I'm really delighted to be with you tonight to connect about my book, books in general, the writing process, misogyny in medicine, all those topics we might cover and more. So it's really great to be here. I'm looking forward to hearing from you about your questions about the book or any of those topics or any others for that matter. And I'll just give people a few minutes to get on and perhaps tell you a little bit about myself. I should start by letting you in on a little secret, which is that my small, white, sometimes yappy dog is sitting next to me, Snowy. I'm hoping she will cotton on that this is a good time to be quiet, but if she interrupts us, please accept my apologies. Perhaps we can give a Snowy award for the best question, whichever question she interrupts as we go along. We'll see what happens. But hopefully I've put her to sleep. Hopefully that is not a reflection of my entertainment value. Hopefully you guys will stay awake. I've got my cup of tea here. I hope that you have your beverage of choice. And I'll start perhaps by telling you a little bit about me. So I am a doctor and a writer. Cut is my first adult novel, so debut adult novel. I published a young adult novel, luckily for me, just before the pandemic. So that was my first foray into publishing. And my day job is as a genetics doctor. So I see children who have undiagnosed genetic conditions and try to get to the bottom of what their diagnosis might be so that hopefully we can take the best medical care of them possible. So I juggle these two careers. I'm passionate about both. And I'm actually increasingly passionate about people in healthcare fields having another outlet, whatever that may be, creative or otherwise. For me, writing's been an incredible source of nourishment and it's just been a fantastic antidote to some of the difficult things that we can see in healthcare. So I feel really lucky to be able to do both of those jobs, and they actually don't really feel like a job a lot of the time. So I'm hoping people will be starting to drift in. Thank you for the welcome messages. They're lovely. It's lovely to know that I am not totally speaking into a void. Perhaps I can start by telling you a little bit about Cut and how I came to write it. So Cut is the story of Carla, a young doctor who wants to be the first female surgeon at a traditional, prestigious Melbourne hospital. She thinks she can handle the sexism that is her every day, but an assault at a boozy workplace dinner leaves her traumatized, and she struggles to deal with the misogyny around her and to compete for the job she so desperately wants. Really, for me, Cut is about what happens when the ambition of a young, independent woman collides with a world made for men by men. And you might wonder, why is a genetics doctor writing about a surgical trainee? And that would be a very fair question. I guess I've always been interested in the experience of people who might be a bit of an outsider. I think in medicine, there are stereotypes of what a typical doctor might look like or be like. And I have always felt, as a doctor, a little bit different to the standard stereotype. And I've always been interested in exploring that, definitely all the way through my training and working as a consultant I've had experiences directly myself of misogyny, but also observed other women experience misogyny in the workplace. And I'll be honest, I didn't actually think a huge amount about that. I think it was very ingrained from a very early time in medicine that you just dealt with that. You didn't draw attention to it. It would be a sign of weakness to complain or really focus on the behaviour of senior males in the team. And of course, the power dynamic didn't really encourage speaking up about things like sexist or unwanted behaviour. But then Me Too happened, and it really got me thinking about what I'd experienced myself and what I'd seen other women experience, and how that had shaped my own thinking about what was appropriate and the women around me. And when I talked to women around me, it was staggering to hear talented, independent health professional women talk about their experiences of misogyny, unwanted sexual advances, inappropriate jokes, having their body touched in the workplace, intimidatory behaviour, all kinds of different types of behaviour that was not welcome. And it really hit me how these women had, largely speaking, they had done nothing about it. They had tolerated the behaviour and just tried to ignore it pretty much. And it got me sort of wondering, what was this internalized misogyny in many ways that we were carrying around, these health professionals that are working in the system? And I wanted to explore that in the book. And so I took my character, Carla, and I put her in an environment that was pretty challenging with male leaders who didn't have great insight into what the experience of a female trainee might be like. And I wanted to explore how Carla would respond to that. I thought of Carla as someone who, particularly at the start of the book, she really does not want to rock the boat. She just wants to succeed in her chosen career. And I wanted to see how that would play out. So that was the kind of original concept for Cut. And I said it sort of just before Me Too, thinking that was a good time period in relation to, I guess, how our society is evolving in relation to these issues. Wendy says, I think you are definitely right about this. Women doctors definitely have to work much harder to get to the same place as men. And I hope, Wendy, that that's not universally the case. I don't know in my career if I can say honestly, say as a geneticist, that I've had to work harder than the men around me, but I guess I've had to find a way to accommodate the family that I wanted, the children I wanted to have. That's a sort of extra challenge that some of my male colleagues haven't had to tackle in the same way. But I think I have had to navigate those experiences that have made me uncomfortable. So I guess in some ways I have had some additional challenges there. I do think in particular the specialties that remain pretty male dominated. So we know that specialties like surgery, cardiology, intensive care, those kind of, I would call them interventionist kind of specialties where there's quite a hands-on kind of a thing or an intervention that doctor provides. Those specialties would strike me as the ones that certainly are most male dominated. And it's interesting, there's been gender parity in medical school entry for decades. So like 20, 30 years, 50-50, female to male. And still we see that those kinds of specialties are, 80% male. And leadership positions in hospitals are similarly, 2/3 male. And similarly with roles of like hospital CEO roles, or even the percentage that are male is even higher. Jell asks, is the balance of gender in the field of genetics more balanced rather than surgery? That's a great question. Thank you, Jell. I would say yes. And I think there are some practical things that make some specialties a lot easier for women, as well as maybe the cultural things that we've been talking about so far. So some of the practical things is this a specialty you could do part-time if you did want to have kids and you didn't want to work full-time? What's the on-call like? Are you up, having to go into the hospital at 2 a.m. to remove someone's appendix? And of course, in genetics, I don't have to do that. So I think that the balance is better in a lot of specialties that are non-interventionist. So to give you some examples, things like all of pediatrics has closer to 50-50 balance. In fact, there might be some aspects of pediatrics that have more women than men. And I guess it's interesting to reflect on why that might be, but you might imagine that women might be attracted to a specialty working with children if you believe that maternal instinct is a very gendered thing. Certainly, pediatrics is something that you can do part-time. So I think there are some practical things that make surgery and other specialties hard. I would also say that it is, I think, for a woman, some specialties are still pretty intimidating to enter. That's not to say there aren't women successfully navigating training in surgery and lots of other similar specialties. But what I think is that you have to be very driven. And I come back to Wendy's point that I think in those specialties, you do have to be prepared you have to be aware that you're not the stereotype. I mean, let's be honest, if we all close our eyes and said, tomorrow I need to go and see a surgeon for a problem, I'll be honest, if I picture that surgeon, I picture in my head a man. And I don't know if anyone's seen the hashtag on Twitter, I look like a surgeon, but it's a fantastic hashtag with posts of women of colour, gender diverse individuals, all kinds of individuals wanting to sort of point out that not all surgeons are white, middle-aged men. Rosanna says, Cut is such a gripping read. Thank you, Rosanna. That's really kind. How did you go about structuring the novel to keep the reader guessing? Well, that took me a long time to work out, let me tell you. I really struggled with the structure of Cut initially, and I had my character, Carla. She was a very vivid character for me. And I kind of knew who she was. I could hear her voice. I could write scenes from her point of view. But when I knew I wanted to include this theme about misogyny and sexual assault in the book, I really struggled to work out how I was going to tell a story around that was interesting for the reader. And even when I submitted the novel for publication, I hadn't totally, if I'm really honest with you, I hadn't totally solved that problem. I had one breakthrough when I realised that if I told the story as something of what I would call a non-linear narrative, so instead of it being sort of really truly chronological, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, that in itself asked some questions, or maybe generated questions in the reader's mind that they wanted answered, and that I guess was a kind of stimulus, gave the book momentum in a way that I hadn't had previously. So that was a bit of a aha moment for me. And what I learned also from that was that when I felt energized by reading the story, so I realized by sort of placing in the book, there are what I would call flash forwards. So they're kind of like flashbacks, but they go forward in time. And by interspersing those with the kind of present day narrative, I found myself really energized while I was writing the book. And what I realized was I had to follow that feeling. So realizing this way of telling this story is working for me. It's doing something for me. And I'm going to trust that with a bit of luck, it might have the same effect on at least some of the readers. And I hope that that does work for you. But if not, that's okay too. So yeah, the structuring took me a long time to work out, and but that was an exciting day when I kind of dawned on that nonlinear narrative. Lauren asks, how do you think surgical training programs have evolved, if at all, in the past few years to accommodate the gender practicing gap? Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to watch. And I think there's efforts from women and men in surgery to address the experience of female trainees. So the College of Surgeons, which is like the training organisation, the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, undertook a survey, I think it was in about 2016, that a survey of all their trainees and consultants, and that showed that 30% of female trainees had experienced sexual harassment. And I think the evidence was from that survey that almost none of those women had reported that harassment. And so from that, the College of Surgeons have created an action plan, which is to sort of raise awareness about issues around sexual harassment, and recognising that that's one contributor to discouraging women from specialising in surgery. And we know as well that some women will train in surgery, they're passionate about being a surgeon, but they won't stay in the public hospital system, which is perhaps the most traditional kind of place you can practice medicine. Some of them will head off into private practice, which A, is a bit more flexible if you've got children, and B, I think it's true to say, I don't work in private practice, but I think it's true to say that it's perhaps a bit more of a progressive environment. So some of those traditional male medical cultural influences might have evolved a little bit more. I think so. A lot has changed, and the College of Surgeons, the head of the College of Surgeons is a woman, and the head of the College of Physicians, which is the college I belong to as a geneticist, is also a woman. And I'm pretty sure that's the first time in Australia that that's been the case. So that's exciting. It's a really important symbol, but there's still a lot more to do, because when you look around, particularly public hospital departments, you still see that the vast majority of the senior medical staff in those surgical departments are males. And some of those departments have never had a female consultant work in the team. So they might have had female trainees, but they never employed any of them as consultants. And I think it's really hard to be what you can't see. So I think there's some fabulous and exciting progress, and there's still a lot to do. Wendy says having a family does add another level of potential bumps in the road for women. Yes, absolutely. Bumps in the abdomen and bumps in the road, for sure. And I think I know I've talked to some women who, not just in surgery, who, when they've talked with their bosses about trying to accommodate having a family at the same time as training, I think that can be a new experience for some male heads of department. So it can be a bit daunting to have those conversations. For me personally, I was incredibly well supported. And I think one of the things about being in pediatric genetics is that you're surrounded by children, and I think there's a real strong sense of a family ethos. Well, this is a controversial question from Jane. I love a controversial question. She says, did you find yourself basing any characters in Cut on people you had encountered in your early medical years? Now, Jane, we might have to have a private chat later, because I don't know if I can answer that question online. How about we go with this? There's no one in my book that is a real life character, including Carla. As you can see, apart from anything else, Carla is of Italian heritage, and I don't know what you guys are seeing on the screen, but I have red hair and freckles. So Carla is fictional, and all my characters are fictional, but it's 100% true, Jane, that I drew on my experiences of things that happened to me, but also women around me in medicine, things I saw, things I read about. And for my male characters, generally speaking, I find, it's interesting to think about this, but generally speaking, I find that I often will pick one character trait from someone I know. There might be something about a particular colleague or friend that I borrow. It might be a mannerism, it might be the way they talk or the words they use. And I often will marry that with some other traits that suit my purposes when I'm writing a scene or planning how that character is going to fit into the story. So I will be honest and say there are no sort of direct lift or characters I've directly lifted from my own life, but I've absolutely been able to draw from that. And that's obviously been a rich well for me to dip into when I was looking for inspiration. Rosanna asks, how do you balance writing with being a doctor? So I'm lucky. I do work part-time. I work sort of 3.5 days a week in a public hospital. And I fit in my writing mostly first thing in the morning. So it's really appropriate that Snowy's sitting here next to me asleep, because that's the position we tend to assume at about 6 o'clock in the morning. When we get out of bed, I grab a cup of tea and I write until my kids get up usually, and then all hell breaks loose and the day begins. I find that I have to do some things to kind of protect myself, protect that time. So I have to not open my work email, because what I find is as soon as I open my work email, the world floods in, and all the things that I said I would do for a given patient or a colleague, or something I was meant to do yesterday and I didn't quite finish, all those things kind of invade my head, and I just can't create a single sentence. It's just gone. So I find that I have to be kind of really disciplined. And actually the best way, I've taken my work email off my phone so I can't check it. and I just leave my laptop. I start writing longhand. I find that a really good way to kind of get into my writing in the morning. And yeah, I think that those things help me even in the days where I don't feel creative at all. Okay, let's see. Lauren asks, how long did it take you to write Cut, and what inspired you to follow this particular trajectory of the book? Did Carla's outcome change in your mind or on the page over time? Yeah, it's been quite a journey writing this book. And I started writing the book when I was studying writing part-time at RMIT. And I was reflecting with one of my teachers, Tony Jordan, about when all that happened, because it's a long time ago now. And we realized that I was in her class in 2011 writing a version of Cut. And if you read that, it would be very different to how it is now, because I had Carla, this character, as I was saying, really strongly in my head. But it really wasn't until a bit later on that I understood. I knew she was of Italian heritage and I knew she was a woman. So I knew she was a kind of outsider to this traditional surgical department. But it wasn't until later that I realized I wanted to push that narrative and see what happened if I made it, I guess, even more difficult for her, and included sexual assault in her experience. And I think I was a little bit nervous about taking on that material. But going back to what I was saying earlier about feeling where the energy was in the book, I could feel that it was a stronger story when I took those risks. So the outcome for Carla did change in my mind over time. And I guess that's part of learning as you write a book. And I certainly learned a lot. Sharon asks, have any of your work colleagues read your book? If so, what was their feedback on it? Yeah, I have had a few work colleagues read the book. I've had both colleagues who I sought surgical advice or advice from their area of expertise read the book. And I've also had some of my colleagues who are my friends read the book. It's an interesting thing for me because it's sort of like my worlds colliding a little bit. And I was a bit nervous about how the book would be received, but it's been amazing to hear the feedback from people about what they've enjoyed about the book and what's resonated for them. And my surgical colleagues were very kind and fixed all the surgical passages, which some of the bits in the book where I wasn't quite sure of my facts, they were just amazing. I guess I'll get more feedback as the book reaches a broader audience. And, you know, I sort of in some ways embracing myself that there will definitely be people in the world of surgery who won't like the book, and of course that's their prerogative, but I think it's a really fantastic opportunity now that, you know, I guess we're in a time after Me Too where we can all think about, women included, right? We can all think about, what are we carrying around? What have we absorbed from the environment in which we've grown up, the places we've studied and trained? What were the power brokers like? And how has that impacted the way we see the world, the way we treat colleagues, and for doctors too, right? The way we treat patients, you know those things, patients. So I guess, you know, we haven't even talked about that, and I can see that I'm almost out of time, which is astonishing because I feel like we're only just getting started. But you know, a doctor's unconscious biases won't just impact how they interact with their trainees and their colleagues. Of course, it's going to impact on how they judge the patient in front of them. And, you know, for all the women on the call, we want our health professionals to give us the same opportunities as they give their male patients. One really interesting example is that a recent Australian study looking at access to kidney transplants showed that women were 15% less likely to be waitlisted for a kidney transplant compared to men. Now, it'd be interesting to dissect out why that is the case, but on the surface, it implies that the assessment of need for those female patients was different by their doctors than for the male patients. And I think that's, something that means we have to look under the hood and understand what we bring to the equation and, try and illuminate for ourselves the areas, the blind spots that we have, so that we can have a healthier health system and provide better healthcare to our patients. All right, I can see more questions in the chat, but I can also see that I have finished up on our time together. Thank you so much for engaging in such a wholehearted way. I've really loved hearing your question or reading your questions, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on the book. And thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you.